We're really not stress testing the banks?
It's a complete sham.
What's your sense of these stress tests?
The stress test.
Stress tests of the banks, the banks, quote unquote, quote unquote.
Stress test,
Quote unquote. Stress test.
The stress test.
The stress test.
the stress test,
So-called stress test.
stress test,
Stress test.
Stress
The
test.
stress test, it's a hoax? They're really not stress testing the banks?
It's a complete sham.
if the stress tests are too vigorous, banks are going to fail. If the stress tests aren't vigorous enough, the public simply won't believe in their credibility. The banks have enough difficulty in telling it as it is and avoiding mark to the market that people still don't believe what the banks are telling them.
The stress test is designed so that nobody we think well of will ever fail the stress test. Entities that they are not favored by Geithner, you know, he may use the stress test to kill them.
Right.
But no, the banks that really need desperately to be closed will not be closed under the stress test.
So what you're suggesting, Mr. Hertz, is that there may be institutions that are insolvent, and they haven't been forced to write down their books to the point yet, and those are maybe the same institutions that are asking us to modify the mark-to-market rules so that they won't have to admit that they're bankrupt. Is that correct?
I share your point.
Of course, they're going to say, yes, we can, all is well. The stress tests were used at Fannie and Freddie. People forget this?
Right.
Right? There's a statutory stress test, and Fannie and Freddie, you know, called it nuclear winter scenario and such, and they could survive anything. Well, we've seen the reality, right? These stress tests are farces. They don't have any real purpose other than to fool us. The whole idea is to make us the chumps and to continue making us the chumps. We're supposed to go on, and in fact, they're almost open about this.
Wells Fargo is an interesting bank. Its chairman, Richard Kosevich, said that government plans to give banks so-called stress tests are asinine, as he put it. We should point out Wells Fargo took $25 billion of government bailout money last year under the so-called Troubled Asset Relief Program. We should also point out that Wells Fargo and its CEO have been singularly tone deaf, its chairman equally so. And let me remind the good chairman of Wells Fargo that none of those so-called examinations by the bank regulators revealed the crisis that we are now watching banks try to overcome. So maybe that should go into the good chairman's thinking. Some thinking at least should go into what he into his mind before he opens his mouth in the future.
They misdiagnose this as not a problem of there's bad assets, but that people are panicking.
It's a lack of confidence.
Right. So confidence. Yes. So if we lie to the people, and if they believe us, then they will be confident and all will be well.
Right.
Right? It's really Orwellian.
Right. And obviously this is connected to Geithner's toxic plan for the toxic assets, which, again, from my viewing, is a way to take the assets, the liabilities off the bank's balance sheet, put them onto the back of the taxpayer, once again, but doing it in such a complicated way that it's not obvious to the average person that's what's happening. You're saying this is part of a broader idea to fool the American people?
Yeah, but you're right to think of them together, because not only will we not close the banks that desperately need to be closed, not only will we not look for the bad assets, not only will we not look for where there were crimes and report them, but on top of that, we're going to provide an enormous subsidy from all of us as taxpayers. So that guy that goes ranting and raving about people getting subsidies, this is
the real
the subsidy of all history, and it is going to go to the richest people, many of them non-Americans. You look what was disclosed. We gave $5 billion of U.S. taxpayer money to UBS at the same time that UBS was engaged in defrauding Treasury.
Right, and now there's investigations of some UBS high net worth individuals, and we want their tax returns, but it pales in comparison to the money that went through AIG out the back door to
right.
UBS.
So there's a huge fine, $780 million against UBS, and guess who paid it? The taxpayers, because we gave them $5 billion.
U.S. banking giant Goldman Sachs says it lost more than $1 billion in December of last year. The announcement came a day after the bank reported a profit of $1.8 billion for the first quarter of this year. Due to a new accounting system, Goldman was able to place its loss into a one-off period separate to the first quarter profit. Professor, help us understand this. I mean, it sounds all a bit dodgy here. There was a big loss in December, but Goldman Sachs is allowed to say it's made a huge profit in the first quarter of this year. What's going on?
What's going on is more accounting games, and Congress has just extorted our accounting industry to permit these games to cover up the losses of the large banks and investment banks like Goldman Sachs.
I will tell you that I get calls and visits from some of those institutions that are now in government hands, usually about 2 weeks before they get taken over, trying to get the accounting changed.
I mean, that sounds rather scandalous. Is there much of an outcry underway?
There is among sort of ordinary Americans.
It's being run by the Federal Reserve Bank, and they are getting all of our money. Our kids' money, our grandkids' money. It's not fair.
He remains very popular. People wish him well, but in terms of his economic advisors, Summers and Geithner, most of the views within the financial community and regular Americans are deeply negative.
Your elected officials voted for this stimulus package.
They all need to be thrown up. They're all Congress. It's not just, this is not just Democrats. It's not Republicans. It's all of them. All of them. It's Congress. Bush voted for all this. Obama voted for all of it.
It doesn't really matter to you whether it's Republican or Democrat.
Absolutely not. And most people who are here do not.
Position and a splashing over the horizon. What can it be? Looks like it's going to be a free country. They knew that now they'd run their own land. But George III still vowed he'd rule them to the end. Anything I say, do it my way now. Anything I say, do it my way. Don't you get to feeling independent, 'cause I'm gonna force you to obey.
This is just the end of the beginning. The Nader Gonzalez third political force is going to roar through November 4th and into 2009 to build a progressive politics in America that enlists the humane values and the practical needs of the American people.
Turn them off!
This is a theater of the absurd, my friends. This is a theater of the absurd.